Hi, everyone, and welcome back to PodTok. I'm your host, Becky Holland, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. So, today's episode takes us to the darker side of storytelling. Admittedly, like many of us, I've always been a true crime fan. I've listened to more podcasts than I can count, but a few stories have haunted me for years. They're unforgettable and deeply compelling, not only because of the crimes themselves, but because they expose haunting truths about systemic failures, senseless cruelty, and consequences that continue to leave lasting imprints that refuse to fade. In this episode, I'll be highlighting 3 shows: Bear Brook Season 1, In Trust, and Lost Hills Season 4. So let's get into it. Bear Brook. Where to begin? I suppose I'll start with a map. The title of this show is based on Bear Brook State Park, which spans across 4 towns in southern New Hampshire, nestled in the woods between the largest city and the state capital. Coincidentally, this podcast is about 4 innocent victims discovered in abandoned industrial barrels, each life like each town. Dissonant voices, each a fragment of a larger story lost within the same landscape. What we think begins as a standard true crime whodunit spanning over 30 years quickly transforms into a groundbreaking forensic race, not only to identify the victims, but to re-examine the remaining evidence using breakthrough science, genetic genealogy, and the determination of 2 dedicated amateur sleuths to unmask a serial offender once and for all. While we do learn the killer's identity, his prolific use of aliases not only allowed for his ability to move freely around the country while committing heinous acts, but also prolonged the search for justice that this case and the victims so desperately deserved. And one of the most remarkable aspects of Bear Brook is its willingness to let 2 citizen investigators take center stage, and shine they did. Without their incredible sleuthing, the creation of compelling timelines, meticulous tracking of missing persons reports, and unwavering commitment to justice for the victims, this case might never have seen the light of day. Their names are Rebecca Heath and Rhonda Randall. The efforts of these 2 women, combined with the groundbreaking use of genetic genealogy, meaning building family trees from submitted DNA in genealogy databases, ultimately helped law enforcement identify the victims and bring the serial offender to light. And while the dedication of Heath, Randall, the families, friends, law enforcement, and countless others uncovered the facts, it is the host of Bear Brook, Jason Moon, who quietly commands our attention and guides us through the story with insight and gravitas at every twist and turn. Jason, a senior reporter for New Hampshire Public Radio and a producer of several award-winning podcast series, to me is a gifted storyteller whose voice carries this complicated yet deeply enthralling mystery, finally shedding light on a case that spanned decades and bringing a measure of long-awaited closure. So, without a doubt, please go listen to Bear Brook. I highly recommend it. Okay, so if you've listened to my previous PodTok episode, where I recommend a podcast series called The Africas versus America, you may remember my mention of a striking irony. The Africa Family and Move organization, targeted for their Black heritage, communal way of life, and activism, were ultimately forced to relocate their home in Philadelphia to a building on none other than a street named Osage Avenue. The name Osage itself comes from the Osage Nation, who call themselves Niukanska, or Children of the Middle Waters, a people with their own history of displacement, violence, and systemic persecution. To me, Osage Avenue doesn't feel like just a coincidence. It's a reminder of parallel histories of oppression and survival. All of which brings me to my second podcast recommendation today, In Trust. In Trust is a gripping podcast series from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio, hosted by Rachel Adams Heard and Allison Herrera. Together, they skillfully interweave the complicated stories of the Osage people, the Drummond family, and the Osage Reign of Terror. At one time, the Osage Territory stretched across nearly all of present-day Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas, even extending into parts of Illinois, Tennessee, and the southern portion of the Ohio Valley. At the height of their sovereignty, the Osage controlled nearly 64 million acres. But today, After generations of broken treaties, false promises, and forced land cessions, that homeland has been reduced to a fraction of its former size. You guys, it's about 1.4 million acres now. Intrust illustrates the intersection of how land, wealth, and justice were weaponized against the Osage by the very systems that were meant to protect them, and how so much of it unfolded in plain sight. Now, if you've read Killers of the Flower Moon or seen the movie, you already know the depth of exploitation, theft, and violence the Osage have endured, often at the hands of those ascribed to help them. So while the book and film depict violence in bloody, brutal terms, this podcast traces a quieter kind of devastation through paperwork and the legalese of guardianship sealed in backroom business deals. At the turn of the century, the U.S. government declared Native communities incompetent in countless ways, all in an attempt to control, own, and dispossess. For the Osage, this meant a guardianship system created by white men to oversee the finances of those who had inherited land sitting atop oil. You see, every Osage citizen received a share of the tribe's mineral trust, which is called a headright. And these headrights created unprecedented wealth when oil began to transform the region and our country. In many cases, the guardians themselves sought control of the land rights and royalties. As you can imagine, this sudden surge of wealth gave rise to a predatory system. Some businesses, most notably the Drummond family and their general store at the time, charged inflated prices for goods and wares specifically for the Osage people. Others sought headrights and mineral wealth through deceit, whether this was through manipulation of guardianship arrangements or through marriages rooted in exploitation rather than partnership. Land was often stripped away from the Osage through high-pressure sales that overwhelmingly favored non-native buyers, contributing to vast wealth. Meanwhile, this era, often known as the Osage Reign of Terror, marked a time when opportunistic outsiders targeted and terrorized the Osage Nation through deception, poisoning, and even murder in order to gain control of Osage wealth and headrights. When law enforcement willingly looked the other way, the crimes persisted until a newly formed Bureau of Investigation, which is now the FBI, intervened. And while a few convictions were made, countless injustices went unpunished, leaving a legacy of fear, exploitation, and lasting trauma that still echoes today. Please go and check out the podcast series Intrust. I highly recommend it. From the sweeping plains of Oklahoma, we now move to the hills and canyons of Southern California with the Pushkin media series Lost Hills, hosted by Dana Goodyear. These hills and canyons are often described as beautiful and unforgiving, a rugged landscape that is both alluring and treacherous. They are seen as untamed wilderness, yet also claimed by Hollywood royalty. Despite countless efforts over the years to shape and control it, the land resists, retaining its wild, unpredictable spirit. And it's against this backdrop that we encounter the story of Mitrice Richardson, the young woman at the center of Lost Hills Season 4, Dark Canyon. The host, Miss Goodyear, tells this compelling story in a voice and style that immediately draws in listeners. She speaks with a quiet yet investigative intensity, carefully weaving together facts, emotions, and atmosphere in a way that mirrors this rugged landscape. It's in this place that Mitrice Richardson, a young Black woman, went missing in 2009. Similar vein to Bear Brook and Intrust, this too is a story in which the very systems designed to protect the vulnerable failed, resulting in devastating consequences and almost no accountability. Mitrice Richardson was a bright, ambitious, witty 24-year-old with a life full of opportunities and promise. On the evening of September 16, 2009, Mitrice went to a popular Malibu restaurant. But as the night unfolded, her behavior drew concerns. She spoke in riddles, acted erratically, and ultimately left without paying her small bill. Worried for her, the staff of the restaurant called 911, and Mitrice was picked up by deputies and brought to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station. While she clearly was displaying mental distress and continued to act oddly, she was charged with defrauding an innkeeper for the unpaid bill and remanded to a cell for several hours. Meanwhile, during this time, Mitrice's mother, Latice Sutton, contacted the sheriff's station to help understand the situation her daughter was in and to determine next steps. But she also specifically requested that her daughter not be released from their care. She knew that Mitrice was unfamiliar with the area as she wasn't from that area. She didn't have her car, phone, or money, and she had concerns for her daughter's mental state and overall safety. Despite those expressed concerns and ignoring a mother's plea, deputies released Mitrice just after midnight on September 17th, and she disappeared into the night. Alone, disoriented, and vulnerable, Mitrice walked into the dark canyons of Malibu. This was the last time Mitrice was seen alive. What followed can only be described as systemic failure at the highest level. As Mitrice's fierce advocate, her mother has fought tirelessly for justice, shining light on the gross negligence of law enforcement, potential cover-ups, racial and gender biases, the mishandling of mental health crises, and the intensely disorganized search efforts that have marred this investigation. Listeners, I highly recommend Lost Hills Season 4 Dark Canyon to help keep Mitrice's memory alive and see why her story continues to grip and haunt so many. Whew! That's a wrap for this true crime episode of PodTok. I hope you liked it. Thanks so much for listening as always. Of course, links to today's shows, which again are Bear Brook and Trust and Lost Hills Season 4 Dark Canyon, will be available in my show notes, so please go check them out. I can't recommend them enough. Of course, for more information about PodTok, you can email me that's apodtok @gmail.com, or follow our socials at pod.talk on Instagram. And of course, if you like the show, please give us a rating and a 5-star review, as it helps us get discovered. Please be sure to share with friends, family, coworkers, and anyone you think who would love a great podcast series. Thanks so much again for listening, and I hope you have a great day.